Good morning. It's 9 o'clock, and we will begin. We appreciate you being here. I see a number of you endured the long session we had yesterday, so appreciate you coming back for round two here. Nathan has got me a hammer here. So we haven't been using these. I think it's because, and that's the reason I think Wendy is sitting so far down. She's afraid I'm going to use this hammer on her. But anyway, we'll try to manage this hammer appropriately. We'll proceed with our agenda as was issued and published. The first item on the agenda is the consent items, adoption of the agenda, and also approval of the minutes of the October 23rd meeting. Is there a motion that we approve the consent agenda? Got a motion, second, Wendy, it's Carolyn. Okay, any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We'll move to the items on first reading. We've got two really important items here, the math standards and the English language learner standards, and we'll proceed with the math standards. Laura?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Item 2A in front of you, the Tennessee Academic Standards for Mathematics. That item proposes a new set of Tennessee math standards. We had a lengthy discussion and presentation yesterday at the workshop where you heard from the Standards Recommendation Committee Chairman, Dr. Lyle Alshai, I should say, and the two leads of our educator advisory teams, Dr. Joseph Jones, who led the math team, and Ms. Shannon Duncan, who led the English language arts team. But these math standards, just as a reminder, were developed as a result of a comprehensive standards review process, and they represent the collective efforts of Tennesseans all across the state. That process included more than 200,000 reviews and comments from more than 3,000 Tennesseans. It also involved a highly skilled educator advisory team who reviewed the feedback and made an initial set of revisions. The work was also reviewed by our Standards Recommendation Committee. This appointed committee heard numerous feedback reports, attended roundtable feedback sessions all across the state, and ultimately made a recommended set of revisions. Those revisions were made, and at their meeting last week, they approved this set of mathematics standards before you and recommended it to the state board for approval. I also want to take this time to recognize one of our Standards Recommendation Committee members who wasn't able to join us yesterday but is here in the audience today, and that's Dr. Shirley Curry. And so the resulting standards before you today are Tennessee-specific, they're rigorous, and we fully believe that they will set our students on a path towards success. And at this time, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Questions, comments? Wendy?
I have two questions. One is, obviously, I don't have the substantive knowledge to have looked through these and have, like, real questions that quickly. Will we be able to review these over the course of the next several months, and if we have questions, talk to staff and look at any potential revisions?
Great question. Absolutely. So we recognize that these standards, given the timeline and the recent approval by the Standards Recommendation Committee, you only received those last week. And so we would absolutely encourage you to take this time between first and second reading to look at those standards. Let us know if you have any questions or concerns, and we can dig in further and have additional conversations.
Okay, and then my second question is, I received an email from one of my constituents, Ms. Buffington, and I believe you received
Yes.
that email as well. She's a lifelong math teacher from Franklin who sent in some of her concerns, and are you guys looking through those? I know she wasn't in the process, but she's looking at it now. If you guys are looking through those to see where there may be some points that you could...
Absolutely. So we will be looking through those. We just got them this last week and haven't had a chance to do so yet, but we absolutely will be, and we'll be in touch with you if there are any concerns that we find after reviewing her comments or potential changes that might need to be made.
Okay, great. And then the only other thing I want to say is I just want to thank you and all the people who led this work and the committees for all of the work that you guys have done, the hours that you've spent. It's really impressive, so thank you.
Thank you. It was a team effort.
Okay, other questions, comments?
And things that affect math, like where you've got a low case B when you should have upper case be. And she has been very thorough at that, so I would support whatever she has to say.
Absolutely. We will make sure we look at those. The last thing we want to do is have any grammatical errors in the standards that go out. They're also quite lengthy, so we will use this time between first and second reading to really dig in and make sure we've got all that information correct. And we appreciate any and all constituent feedback and concerns, and we'll continue to take that between first and second reading and share it with the board.
Cato?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ditto what Wendy said. Laura, you and your team have done a tremendous job, and this is great work, and I applaud you. And something you said yesterday, what you have learned from this going forward will benefit us for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other comments or questions? Okay. Is there a motion that we approve on first reading? Got a motion? A second? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, English language arts standards, Laura?
Yes. So item 2B is very similar to item 2A. It is the set of English language arts standards. These standards have gone through the same review process. They had the same appointed standards recommendation committee and also had an educator advisory team who was involved in making the initial revision. So all of my comments about the previous item would also apply to this item. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions about this one.
Okay, questions, comments, concerns? Any questions? Commissioner, do you want to make any announcement about or promote the reading thing? It's an important part of these standards, and I think an important part of one of the things we need to be working on.
Absolutely, and I want to take an opportunity because I know there were some folks that were here yesterday that are now here today to say thank you. I know Shannon is here. Shannon, if you would stand, and Tammy Shelton from our area. Anybody else that I've missed that worked specifically with the advisory teams and from our department on these standards? Okay, thank you very much for your work and appreciate the presentations and all the diligence that you have done, not only yesterday, but the many months, the year that has led up to this moment. And specifically, I do want to mention we have an event on February 17th that we would invite you to. It's called Read to Be Ready as we kick off a campaign around the importance of particularly early reading and how we connect early reading to, quite frankly, moving on to post-secondary. And there's a tight connection to that. And so our work on February 17th will be to share our data, new reading report, how we are going to approach reading going forward as a state and how we're looking at these standards, as well as something inspirational around the importance of reading. So hope you will come February 17th. Board members, I believe your invitation went directly to your TN address. We will work to make sure it goes to your personal address if you don't check that very often. But 1 to 3 Music City Center on February 17th. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. Any questions, comments? Is there a motion that we approve on first reading? Got a motion? Second. Any questions, comments, discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We spent a lot of time looking at these yesterday, a lot of discussion, had a lot of good presentations by the folks that have been involved in this. What is SRC, Standards Review Committee? We've got so many initials here, I forget what they are, but they just did a fantastic job with this, and this is kind of, I think, a red letter day for Tennessee. You know, I spend a fair amount of time in Washington working with the National Assessment Governing Board, and we've got people from all over the country looking at how we went about doing these standards, how we took the governor's process and implemented that process. And I think it's a lot of interest in it. We, some extent, are setting the standard for how you ought to go about setting standards for K-12. So this is really important. We will be coming back on final reading for these in April, and as been indicated, I'm sure we'll have some tweaking to be done by then, but with that, I think we've got to have an excellent set of standards in place for both math and English language arts. So big thank you to all the people, teachers throughout the state. You know, we've got people that have got full-time jobs, and they've spent a lot of time on this, and it's really a tremendous effort, and we really feel good about it and appreciate all the work that's going into it. And Laura, appreciate all your work. Let's move to item C, which is associated with this, but kind of a separate item.
Yes, so item C is the removal of the Common Core standards for literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects in grades 6 through 12. So this item proposes to remove that set of literacy standards. The intent of these standards was to outline key literacy and content area reading skills that should be taught across a variety of different subjects. However, based on the new standards review processes we have in place, as well as feedback we've received from educators and districts, we've decided to take a new approach to addressing the important issue of content area literacy. We're now working with various standards review teams. The math team was the first team that we worked on with this to develop specific content area literacy standards for each subject. And the intent of this new process is to actually embed those content area specific standards within the standards document. So you saw in the math standards that the board just approved that there's an embedded set of math literacy standards as a part of that set of standards. The benefit to this approach is that these literacy standards will now be better focused and tailored to a particular subject. And as I mentioned before, they will be embedded within that standards document, ensuring that teachers are able to find all of the standards related to their subject area in a single place. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, questions? Comments? Carolyn?
I just had a question that I'd asked you before, is how we will go about doing that, embedding in each subject area standards. What kind of timeline do we have in place for that?
It's a great question. So part of that work has already begun with some of the sets of standards, and you'll see that with some of the ones that come before you today that come out of the Office of Early Post-Secondary. And so the fire prevention and management course that you see today, we worked with that team, and they already had literacy pieces embedded in theirs. The math standards, when they went through this review process, have those embedded. And then we're beginning the process with the science review team to develop those standards, and then we'll do the same with social studies later this year. So it's a pretty quick timeline that we're working to do that work. Yes.
Okay, other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve? Got a motion, second? Okay. Any discussion, questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Hey, Laura, you're still up.
I'm still up.
Yep.
This is my last one, though. So item 2D is the permanent elective courses for English language arts. So this item recommends for approval a series of elective courses for English language arts that districts may choose to adopt. So included in this proposal are two new elective courses, genre literature and visual literature. There's also been revisions to several previously approved elective courses, journalism, creative writing, and speech and communications. And then finally, with this proposal would be the removal of two previous elective courses that have been offered, competency English and content area reading. And these changes would go into effect in the 2017-18 school year, the same time as the new Tennessee academic standards for English language arts. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Concerns? Comments? Is there a motion that we approve? Oh, okay.
I was just going to ask if you had an idea about how many high schools are using these courses.
I do not have that information with me right now, but I can definitely follow up with that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions? Discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. We'll move to item E, Educator Preparation Policy 5.504. Amy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here to present item 2E, a revision to the Educator Preparation Policy.
Thank you. Item 2E, Educator Preparation Policy.
I thought you were Amy, but go
What'd you
ahead.
say?
Yeah.
Okay. It is a clarification and addition to this policy that has two important parts. The first is a clarification regarding out-of-state providers, just to be sure that we clearly indicate how out-of-state providers should be working with educators who are being prepared within Tennessee, and then if they wish to become a Tennessee-approved provider, sets clear expectations for that process. The second aspect of the revision is addressed to potential providers that have fewer than 3 years of a track record regarding financial stability, and provides an option for them if they are seeking to become a Tennessee-approved provider. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, questions? Wendy?
I don't have a question. I have something I need to put on the record. As Dr. Wooten knows, the nonprofit that I work for is currently incubating a teacher prep program that is going through this process. So out of an abundance of caution, I asked the general counsel for the board whether there would be any conflict in me participating in this vote. I was advised there is no conflict, but I just wanted to make sure I put that on the record. Thank you.
Okay. Mike?
Amy, I should have asked this yet. When we talk about out-of-state providers, are we talking about Arkansas, or are we talking about online schools?
It's both.
And do we handle those different? Are they? So, so I'm just in my mind trying to think through. All right, so we got Georgia and whatever.
Right.
Will we communicate to all those colleges that want, I guess, reciprocity or whatever, and say, here's the deal for our folks, and they convince us that they're in compliance?
I think I understand your question. So most out-of-state providers are not trying to train people while they're so this is really focused on out-of-state providers that would be working with the job embedded pathway, which allows someone to serve as a teacher of record while they are still in their preparation program. So if you complete a preparation program in another state and all requirements are completed, we have reciprocity that is covered under our NASDAQ agreement, which is an agreement that all states participate in. This is really directed to, and again, I used the example yesterday of Harding University, where they operate with Shelby County Schools and train teachers while they are enrolled who are also working as teacher of record in Shelby County Schools, but they do that as an out-of-state provider under their approval in their state.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, is there a motion that we approve on first reading? Got a motion? Second? Got a second. Any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Charter School Appeal Policy 2.5, Tess. Got a big notebook too.
Good morning, Chairman and members. Today I present to you on first reading updates to the Charter School Appeal Policy the State Board of Education has. At the conclusion of last fall's appeal process, we did feedback sessions with representatives of school districts who participated in the process, sponsors of applications, as well as our review team members, to really get a sense of how they felt about the overall process and any sort of refinements and clarifications we needed to make. So based on these conversations, as well as our own internal staff analysis, we are presenting two main buckets of really kind of refinements to our appeals process. So I'm going to talk about those very briefly. The first one is around the notice of appeal. During our feedback conversations, especially with sponsors, we saw that there was confusion around what it means to make corrections to the application upon appeal. So the statute allows in certain areas of an application the sponsor to make corrections. But we were finding that people were not sure exactly what that meant and how they should do that. So we wanted to provide some clarity around that language. And secondly, we also were finding that the review committees wanted a quote-unquote clean copy of the application to review. A lot of districts require a track changes version of the application to be submitted when they resubmit to the district, but if you're a review committee member, it can be challenging to conduct a de novo review of an application when there are substantial track changes. So although the board will still collect the original application that was submitted to the local board, we do want a kind of a clean copy so that we can give something fresh to the review committee. And secondly, the second bucket of changes that you are seeing is around the public hearing. So some of the feedback we received was that the timing that we had allocated for the closing statement was only 5 minutes, and people really wanted more time in the closing to be able to address kind of anything that was brought up in either kind of the opposing side or public comments. And we were also finding that very rarely sponsors or the school districts were not taking the full 20 minutes in an opening statement. So what we've done is shifting a little bit more time to the closing statement and reducing the time in the opening statement. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Mike?
I got it. When you're talking about something as complex as a charter school, is 20 minutes really enough to really be able to ask all of the questions or present a case? Seems to me like there's a whole lot of detail and drilling down that would need to be known to make a knowledgeable decision one way. I just wonder if 20 minutes seems...
Yeah, and Dr. Hayburn, you can please feel free to step in as well. How we conducted the hearings this time is that we gave both the sponsor and the representatives of the local school district 20 minutes each to kind of present their case. And then before we moved into public comment, Dr. Hayburn asked some additional questions that were not allocated as a part of those 20 minutes of either the school district or the sponsor to really make sure that we got our questions answered on the specifics of kind of the things in the application. So based on our experience, we felt like that timing was good. And Dr. Hayburn, I don't know if you want to...
Just to piggyback on that, I think the other thing to note is that the public hearing is only one piece of sort of the review process in terms of our ability to get information about the case being presented. So the public hearing really is the public sort of conversation for folks in the community or in the school system that want to come and make comment about the case. There's also an informational interview that the review committee does with the sponsor. There are numerous back and forth conversations that our staff have with the sponsor and the LEA. The de novo review that the committees do. I mean, there's a number of sort of moving parts there that are in addition to the public hearing. So I think the opening for the public hearing is just one chance to sort of present the summary of the case that the sponsor is presenting.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay. Is there a motion to approve? Got a motion? Second? Got a second? Any discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Tess. Okay, without objection, I'm going to ask that we combine items G through K. Joy, they all deal with the same, various pieces of the same subject. So, Joy, if you could kind of address items G through K, and then we'll vote on them one time.
Okay, that's perfect. So, Item 2G proposes updating the employment standards for non-licensed educational interpreters, and this is the information we shared in yesterday's workshop, which for current educational interpreters prior to January 21 who do not satisfy the licensure requirement, they will have to obtain a passing score on the written portion of the EIPA and obtain a minimum score of 3.0 on the performance assessment portion of the EIPA prior to January 1st, 2021. And then for folks on or after January 1st, 2021, we anticipate folks holding a minimum of an associate's degree and having a passing score on the written portion and a minimum score of 3.0 on the EIPA as well. On item 2H, here we are presenting revisions to the educational interpreter policy, and that would delete the current screening requirements, current training requirements, but it adds the good faith attempt to hire educational interpreters who hold school services personnel licensure, and it requires LEAs to employ educational interpreters that either meet the requirements for licensure or meet the employment set forth in the state board rule. The next item is the proposed addition of the educational interpreter license under the category of school services personnel. So this is where we would recognize educational interpreters with a bachelor's degree and a national certification as school service personnel. And the next item sets forth the criteria for those educational interpreters, which would be a minimum of a bachelor's degree and one of the following, which would be a current nationally recognized certification, which includes a written examination related to ethics and practice, or again, a passing score on the written portion of the EIPA and a minimum score of 3.5 on that assessment. And then finally, this is regarding that assessment, and it adds that EIPA requirement for educational interpreters as the professional assessment for that group. And educational interpreters are exempt from praxis like school service personnel. So those are those items.
Okay, and Joey, if you would just speak to the intent of what we're trying to address here, or what the
Right, yes, sir.
What we're trying
so first, I would like to thank the 19-member task force that worked with us. They came to us with these concerns and really led this work and did this work, and they were great partners in the process. But the intent is to ensure that all students, deaf, deafblind, or hard of hearing, have access to a qualified educational interpreter, regardless of what district they sit in across the state. And that access would lead to increased success in school, which aligns with our All Means All, a strategic priority, and also access to post-secondary.
Great. And this is another item that we spent considerable time on yesterday working through. Questions, comments? Sarah?
No, when we get to the vote, I want to make sure we're okay to vote with, there's some policy and some rule items in this batch, so let's just make sure Nathan's checking we're good to do them all together? It's first reading.
This is first reading. On the final reading, we'll have to do it separately, but first reading, I think we're okay to, yeah. Okay. Question? I'm sorry, Wendy.
No, I don't have a question. I just want to thank you for the work you're doing on this, for the work you're doing for kids like mine across the state. I appreciate it, and I want to thank the group of folks who have worked on this so hard. I know a bunch of them are here today, and I just want to recognize their work as well and say we, appreciate everything that you're doing. All Means All is, real here, and that's great.
Thank you.
Great. Yes, Cato?
Wendy, that was succinct and ditto.
Ditto. Yes, Carolyn.
Okay, I just have a comment, and I support everything that's been said, but I want to also say that it raises the question of, do we need more training across our state for certified people to do this work? We only now have 2 programs. I understand they're both in the Knoxville area. And I'm thinking that we might need to hook up with our TBR partners and see about community college programs that might provide some help to us. So maybe we can make the effort during the time before we come back to second reading to make some links.
We can certainly do that, and the task force has already had conversation to continue their work and bring in our community college and higher ed partners regarding that. And we actually have discretionary funds through IDEA that might help with some of those programs.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve on first reading? Got a motion? Second? Okay, this motion is on items G through K. All in favor? No, I think on first reading, we're okay to do them together. When we come back on the final reading, we'll have to, because of rule and policy, we'll have to do them separately. Okay, items G through K. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Joy. And really thank all the folks that worked on this. This is a significant achievement, so we appreciate you. Okay, Joey, you're still up. Item L.
Right. Yes, so this is regarding a special education intervention course. In 2013, the State Board passed a Tier 3 course for students that weren't identified for special education services, and Tammy Shelton brought that item before the State Board. What we're proposing here is to add 2 courses, one, a special education intervention course for K-8, and then also a special education intervention course for 9-12. As we've continued our implementation of response to instruction intervention, we've heard from LEAs the need to offer courses specifically at high school for our students with disabilities so they can earn elective credit toward that general ed diploma.
Okay. Question, Carolyn?
Could you describe for us how that would work into their schedule? How they would be scheduled?
Right. So essentially it would rest with the IEP team to determine if there's a need for an additional course for that student. But outside of their requirements for the minimum high school requirements, in place of certain electives, they could have an additional block of time related to specific reading needs or math needs that the student has. So schools could offer a special education teacher to have a block of time to serve students related to these areas. Right, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, other questions? Wendy?
I'm over here. This is why I'm not near the hammer. Will this only be for students who are on a gen ed diploma track, or will it involve the the low incidence higher needs kids?
It would involve all students that are on an IEP if that's the team the decision that the IEP team makes.
And what and you may not know the answer to this, so if you don't know the specific answer, like potentially what impact will this have on inclusive practices? I mean, is this envisioned as a self-contained classroom? Is it envisioned as push in, pull out, or are you leaving it up to the LEAs?
Right. Well, LEA, an IEP team would have the driving decision here. As far as when we think about inclusive practices and LRE, it would really be aligned with that multi-tiered system of support. So our expectation would be the student would have access to Algebra 1, geometry, but we realize that students with specific deficits may need additional time for support, so it would be an addition to that, ideally.
And you'd be tracking that.
Yes, we pay very close attention to LRE numbers in the
Great,
state.
thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve on first reading? Got a motion? Second? Okay, any questions, discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, Joey. Okay, Danelle, statewide dual credit agriculture courses. Item M.
Good morning, everybody. Item M is just a continuation of the conversation that we had yesterday during our workshop. There are two courses that we're putting forward for first reading this morning. One is the statewide dual credit Introduction to Plant Science. The other one is a statewide dual credit Introduction to Agriculture Business. These are two courses who are piloting out of our statewide dual credit program, which is part of Public Chapter 967, which is intended to kind of grow and establish a wide variety of early post-secondary courses and opportunities for students across the state. So these two courses are exiting out of that 3-year pilot program, and so what you have before you are the two courses along with their learning objectives that are tied to that. I'll take any questions.
Okay, questions? Any questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve? Got a motion? Second? Got a second? Questions? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Great.
Okay, you're still up.
Yes. So item N is for fire management services courses. These are courses, there are 3 that are revised and 1 that is new. These courses actually are a beautiful example of the work that we're doing on a division. So on an annual basis, we review our courses, our CTE courses and programs of study to make sure that they're aligned well with post-secondary transitioning as well as industry. So what we found after we had these courses go through is that actually we could make some additional modifications to these courses to even further align with the standards that are set within the post-secondary coursework, as well as what we see across the state through our voluntary fire services areas, as well as our more city and county structured services around fire safety and fire departments. So again, what you see here are exactly that, and we worked with, just for just references as well as for record, we worked with the Chief Gary West, who's the Tennessee State Fire Chief, as well as fire chiefs of both volunteer and city fire departments across the state as we went through these standards to revise them. I'll take any questions on these courses.
Questions? No questions. Okay, a motion to approve. Got a motion? Second? Got a second. Okay. Any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Item O, Child Nutrition Program Rule. Nathan, you go do that?
We're going to pinch hit.
Okay.
Hi, We're presenting a revision to the school nutrition rule. So state law currently requires districts to comply with the minimum nutrition standards set by the state board or to comply with the federal nutrition standards set in the School Nutrition Act. So in 2014, the state board adopted the federal nutrition standards as the state standards, leaving districts, the only way they could be in compliance with the law was to follow the school nutrition standards. We received feedback from many districts that, especially our smaller ones, that felt that the nutrition standards were burdensome and were having a negative financial impact on their district. So this rule would allow districts to opt to not participate in the federal school nutrition program, provided that they still provide free and reduced price lunch to those students that qualify, and that they follow the other requirements for school lunch program that's already laid out in the law.
Also wanted to take the opportunity to walk through sort of the process that happens after you all pass a rule on final reading. It, of course, goes to the Joint Committees on Government Operations, and those committees decide whether those rules will go into the Rules Omnibus Bill every year. And if they decide to put it on hold or to hold it back, then those rules don't take effect. So that's the situation with these rules today on the nutrition process. It was something that both the department staff and myself and our general counsel kind of walked through, and the standing committee on the Joint Government Operations Committee made it very clear to us that they wanted us to use the maximum amount of flexibility for local districts that was allowed under the federal law, and sent us back here with those instructions.
And this is allowed under federal law, the best we can determine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, Cato.
I think you stated that this has no impact on those districts that have large number of students. For instance, Shelby County has 83% of its students qualify for free and reduced lunch programs. You have some of the same problems in many of the rural areas. This would not impact that, as you have stated, or would it?
They would most likely not choose to not participate. It's really the municipalities that have expressed an interest in being able to not participate.
When you decide you're going to take advantage of this, you're also giving up all those federal dollars.
Right,
that's
correct.
what I want to know.
Yes.
So there's the likelihood of that happening is fairly nil.
I was wondering how many students would be affected, probably from what you know of the small districts that are interested in this.
I don't know a total number of students. It's also limited to just high schools, so that would reduce the number. But I don't know. It would depend on the number of districts that choose not to participate, and I would imagine that number would be pretty low.
From conversations, it's appeared to be a very small and limited interest as far as that goes. But it's a matter of principle to the Joint Government Operations Committee, and I think that's why we're here.
Okay. Allison?
I'm just curious, why only high schools?
That is consistent with what other states have done who also have similar non-participation options. And the school nutrition staff, in consultation with Department of Health nutrition folks, felt that it was important to instill the healthy eating habits young, and didn't want to disrupt starting those habits at a young age.
We frankly, at least in the conversations that I've been involved in, there's not been any kind of a call at the earlier grades at all. I mean, the conversations that I've heard have all been about high schools as well.
Okay. Other questions? Is there a motion to approve on first reading?
So move.
Got a motion, second? Second? Okay. Any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Nathan.
Yes, sir.
Salary schedule rule.
Okay. This item brings Rule 05200102 concerning educator salary schedules up to date to reflect the local flexibilities in determining those salaries. This action would put the matter before us, and the department staff as well as our staff will be working to make the final changes before a second reading. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that this would add section of the code that had not been reflected in our rules, which is 49.3306H, and that added a reference to the statutory requirement that the LEAs adopt differentiated pay policies in accordance with the board guidelines. These policies are intended to help LEAs attract and retain highly effective teachers in the hard-to-staff areas. And the staff recommends acceptance on first reading.
Okay, questions?
Thank you. I thought that the state required LEAs to develop a differential pay plan years ago.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, that's the case. You see my purple here is the section of the law that specifically requires it, and that's what you're talking about. And so that, among other reasons, is one of the reasons that we're putting this before you, is because that was not reflected in the old rule, but the old rule did have some out-of-date provisions that we needed to step away from.
So the rule, we're aligning the rule with the law.
Aligning the two, yes, sir. That's exactly right.
Okay, so if I may be indulged, I like to read this for our folks out in TV land. School systems shall develop, adopt, and implement a differential pay plan under guidelines established by the State Board of Education and subject to approval by the department to aid in staffing hard to staff subject areas in schools and hiring and training highly qualified teachers. School systems are encouraged to make annual adjustments to their differential pay plans. Differential pay plans should be targeted to aid districts in meeting staffing needs. This is not a option or a recommendation or a suggestion. This is a requirement of all the school districts, not only to develop a plan, but to implement a plan, which means that if there is a district, and there are, who are having trouble identifying somebody qualified to teach chemistry, or to teach physics, or to teach whatever there is a tremendous shortage of, they are to use this plan. In other words, they can't hide behind, we can't afford them, so we don't have them. They now have a vehicle that can no longer be used, that we can't afford them.
Well, and that's the exact point of putting this there. But when we refer to the law, this 49.3306H, which if you'd like, I can share it with you. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of this section to the contrary, an LEA shall develop, adopt, and implement a differential pay plan under guidelines established by the State Board of Education to aid in staffing hard-to-staff subject areas and schools and hiring and retaining highly qualified teachers, and the plan shall be reviewed and evaluated annually. In other words, almost word for word the same piece. But the last sentence is that each LEA shall implement a differential pay plan prior to the beginning of 2008-2009 school year. And, of course, we're sitting at 2015. So you're exactly right, sir.
Yeah. So
2016.
In my knowledge of, which is limited, of just a few school districts, but I think a good number of them actually went through the effort of developing a plan so they could have that on their checkoff list. The plan may have actually altered how they handled pay toward, in some ways or something. To my knowledge, none of them said, we're going to use this to go out and recruit really qualified, hard-to-teach teachers and pay them what the market would require. And this is something that we need to pay very close attention when we see scores coming in that are challenged, that that districts can't say, well, you know, we really didn't have those qualified teachers. We're going to have to make an effort to recruit those qualified teachers and pay what it's going to take to get them in.
I'd like to add a comment. There are programs, there are differentiated pay in the districts in the Upper Cumberland. I cannot say it exists for every county, but absolutely they have included in there pay for hard-to-fill positions. So again, I don't know what it looks like across the rest of the state, but I know in the Upper Cumberland there's been a hard push to make that happen for the very reason that we're talking about it today. We do need to find those highly qualified teachers to teach those subject areas that are hard to fill. And so I know it exists in the Upper Cumberland, but again, I don't know about the rest of the state. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, I would add to that. That's absolutely true. Statewide, there are multiple districts who do have either bonus pay for almost like recruitment pay. I'm going to recruit this math teacher, and so I'm going to give them a signing bonus because they're in a hard-to-fill area. Some have actually added additional money for that particular hard-to-fill position, and so there are districts that are utilizing it. It's not all 142 districts, but there are a select number of districts that are doing that.
Yeah. One of the ways, unfortunately, it is happening is that some school districts are cherry picking other school districts, and they're able to do it by being out. Some of them have just higher pay schedules across the board, and they can go after those. Really, what I'm talking about is on the macro. Statewide, how many classes are taught statewide chemistry, and how many people who are really, really qualified to teach chemistry are filling those statewide, all those chemistry classes. And my argument is, while there are ways for people to compete against that smaller cohort of people who meet those, we're going to have to grow that total number to meet the demand.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Other comments, questions? And Nathan, I guess the way I see it is it brings the rule in line with the legislation. It really, by itself, doesn't change to any extent what's actually happening out there.
Well, it doesn't necessarily, but one of the things that as you know, the state board staff is involved in a comprehensive policy audit, and I think you're going to see more and more things like this that come before as we find things that are out of date or sections of the code that are not reflected in our rules. And so this was another opportunity for you as a board to say, not only is this in law, but we recognize this as being extremely important. So that's why we've added that. We'll continue to work with the department staff between now and final reading on any other changes.
Okay. Yes, Sarah.
Just one other note. I know this is a topic that's been of great interest to the board over the years, and I know when I was at the department, I worked closely on some of the early implementation when we began trying to implement with districts the law that had been in place for quite a while. Laura Enkelad on our team now at the state board was also highly involved, and I know the commissioner, if it's of interest to the board, we can bring an update on implementation of differential pay. I think there's been a big push over the last couple of years, and yet we need to continue to see districts utilize that as one of the ways to attract and retain some of their best teachers. The conversation yesterday, even on the equity plan that Sylvia Flowers and some of her team members were presenting, I think speaks to that need still in a lot of different ways. We didn't get quite to that level of conversation yesterday in terms of how the differentiated pay plans can be part of that strategy, but happy to bring that as an update.
Okay. Other question, comments? Is there a motion to approve? Got a motion? Second. Any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. We'll now move to items on final reading. Item A, individualized education account rules. Rebecca.
Good morning. The Individualized Education Account Act that was passed last year authorizes the State Board of Education to approve rules for the Individualized Education Accounts Program, or IEA program for short. The rules are being presented to the board today on final read.
The proposed rules were developed by both the board staff and the Tennessee Department of Education in consultation with the Tennessee Department of Health and were informed by feedback from stakeholders from across Tennessee. Since first reading, the rules were revised based on feedback from the IEA External Advisory Group and the public comments. The revisions to the rules that were made since first reading include referring to students enrolled in the IEA program as students who are receiving IEAs as opposed to IEA students, revising the definition of educational therapies, and changing the percentage of IEA funds that must be spent each year from 90% to 50%. After the rules were approved on final read, the department will release draft procedures, a parent handbook, and provider handbook for public review before they are approved on final read, and the IEA program will go into effect beginning in the 2016-17 school year. We plan to release the student application period by August the 1st of this year, and then the first IEAs will be awarded in January of 2017. The department is committed to continuing our efforts to implement the law responsibly, effectively, transparently, and in compliance with the law's specific language and intent to provide students and parents with the education options pursuant to the law and to do so in a clear and transparent way so that parents can make informed choices and to continue to provide timely communications and engagement with stakeholders. Finally, the development of the IEA program was truly a team effort and a statewide effort, and we are truly grateful for all of the feedback and guidance and support from countless individuals, including members of the State Board of Education, the IEA External Advisory Group, the Governor's Advisory Council for Students with Disabilities, members of the public, staff from multiple divisions across the department, and the State Board of Education staff. Thank you for your consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Wendy?
Hi. First, Rebecca, thank you for all the work you've done and for tolerating my millions of questions that I've asked over the course of this process. I have a couple more questions for you. So this law got a lot of attention when it was up at the legislature. There was a lot of heat around it. And so I'm a little bit surprised that during the public comment part, it looks like there were 5 members who spoke and 18 who submitted comments, as opposed to the standards where we had thousands. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on why. I mean, the community that I am involved in with parents of kids with disabilities are very concerned. There's any reason why that is, and if there's a way to improve the outreach for the next public comment around the parent handbook, which I think is critical.
So I think part of the reason why we might have seen a lower number of comments on the rules after they were read on first reading was because in the development of the rules, we did engage stakeholders during that process. So by the time that the rules were heard on first read, we had already received a lot of feedback that went into developing those rules, as well as conducting a lot of research on what other states had done to help inform the rules as well. So that was probably one reason why we saw less revisions on the second read. And then also we did engage and work with giving presentations at multiple conferences across the state to really ensure that we heard input. So I think that the rules went before and were reviewed by as many people of the public who would be interested in providing feedback on the rules. But we are definitely engaging the stakeholder groups and continuing to improve our outreach efforts, including creating a comprehensive list of all the stakeholder groups and regularly communicating with that group on a monthly basis.
Is there a way when the public comment will be opening for the parent handbook? Because I think the rights that you're giving up, it's critical to understand. And the rights are complicated to begin with. Mm-hmm. So understanding what they are and then what you're giving up is a really important part of this. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to push that information out to, and I don't know what the costs of communications are for the department, but push it out to districts so that schools can let parents of kids with IEPs know, hey, here's an opportunity for you to review this and see if you have any questions. I think parents who walk this path, I am one, and I know plenty of them. They would have a lot of valuable input in what needs to be in that handbook as new parents are coming on board. So I just want to throw that out as a possibility.
And feedback is crucial, and we are definitely, anytime we release any updates about the IEA program, we release that through all of our educator listservs. So it goes out to school districts and school district staff directly, as well as being posted on the department's website. And I will say we have a monthly newsletter, an IEA update, that any parent or member of the community can subscribe to receive updates on the IEA program, and we will announce the release of those handbooks and procedures through that update.
Okay, that would be great. I mean, I think my only concern is that districts may not have a huge incentive to let parents know about this. And you know, I'm not judging that or anything, but I just, anything the department can do to get that information to parents, you will get plenty more than 5 speaking and 18 writing in, and it'll be valuable information. So I appreciate all the efforts, and I know it's hard to get things from your level to the parents, but I just think when it comes to the rights, anything you guys can do, we appreciate.
And I would add, we have added the Parent Advisory Council, and so we will make an effort at our first meeting to actually talk about this with that new council. So I appreciate you bringing that up because we will add that to the agenda.
Great, thank you.
Okay, other questions, comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve? Got a motion, second? Okay, any questions, comments? Okay, it requires a roll call vote, so Phyllis, if you call the roll, please. Aye. The motion is passed. We'll move to the next items, and without objection, I'd like to combine items B, C, and D. They all deal with basically the same subject. So, Danielle, if you could talk about items B, C, and D, and then we'll consider questions and votes.
Sounds great. Thank you. So item B is final reading on the service learning course. This course brings into alignment with our State Board Work-Based Learning Framework on High School Policy 2.103, which sets expectations for all work-based learning, and service learning is a part of that larger framework. Between first and final reading, we had an opportunity, which we do every time with courses, to have an open comment period and sought out purposefully over 100 different individuals, including the Tennessee Volunteer Board, which helps actually to oversee a lot of the service learning activities across the state, and received just really wonderful comments back, all of which were affirming this course and the course standards. So what you have before you are actually really no changes to this particular course, except we did make some modifications to address some of the state standards around literacy and technical subjects, which Laura had brought before you in first reading earlier this morning. So that is that particular item. I can stop right there and just see if there's any questions on that one before I move on to the next one.
Okay.
So the next one, item C, is a final read for the Jobs for Tennessee Graduates course, which is a general elective course. These standards were developed by Jobs for Tennessee Graduates, which is an affiliate of the Jobs for America's Graduates Organization, which is a third-party vendor. So I'll stop there for that. There were no changes made by the vendor for that course, and we received no feedback on it. And then the last one is just making those modifications to the high school courses policy 3.205. And so all it would do is just simply record the changes made to these 2 courses that I just mentioned.
Okay. Questions? Comments?
Just a comment to thank you for your work and the work of your team. Great job.
Thank you. They're a good group of people.
And I'd just like to add the thanks there. You know, I think this is a real important area that we need to focus on. You know, it's a lot of example programs around the country, I think, are taking real advantage of this kind of concept, service-based learning or connecting jobs to what is actually happening in high school. I think is terribly important, and we've got a big population out there that can really benefit from what the whole area here. So
yeah.
I think this is an important area, and we need to continue to look for
Yeah,
opportunities to expand.
I would agree with you, Chairman. And if there is ever an opportunity in the future, I'd love to bring Chelsea Parker back maybe for a workshop and have her update you on the state's larger work-based learning program. It is quite exceptional. And in fact, actually, we're launching a champions group this morning with heads of manufacturing companies across the state to continue to develop those relationships that are so essential between education and industry. But nonetheless, she's doing an exceptional job, and I think you guys would enjoy hearing from her.
Yeah, I think we all agree, and we ought to try to get that on our April workshop. That's a good suggestion. Okay. Any questions on items B, C, or D? Comments, questions? Is there a motion to approve? Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. Okay, Child Nutrition Program rule. Got our nutrition tag team coming up again.
Yes, we're becoming school nutrition experts.
We usually have the Rocky theme behind us. When we
Yeah.
This is the final read of the rule regarding special exemptions for infrequent school-sponsored events. So if you remember from last meeting, the Government Operations Committee asked the board to consider providing additional days for schools to hold infrequent school-sponsored events that did not have to meet the school nutrition standards. This rule changes the 30-day exemption that was currently in place to 20 days per semester, so 40 days per year, with the option for them to request additional days from the department.
Again, this is an example of the Government Operations Committee saying they're happy to include our rules in the Rules Omnibus Bill as long as they look a little bit more the way they want them to look. And, of course, that's their statutory authority, and that's why it's back in front of you. We also think that this is reasonable in terms of giving more leeway to the districts without it being just out of hand. So.
Okay. Questions? Any questions? Is there a motion to approve? Got a motion, second? Second. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Any discussion? Okay, required. Yeah. Right. And we keep kind of expanding the number of Twinkies.
I call Twinkies.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, requires a roll call vote. Phyllis?
Ms. Chancellor? Mr. Edwards? Ms. Hartgrove? Mr. Johnson? Ms. Perry? Ms. Tucker? Mr. Ralston?
Aye. The ayes have it. No more nutrition for today, huh?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item F. Paul, teacher principal evaluation.
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick side note on a previous item. I believe we have right at 70 districts that are using hard to staff for their differentiated pay plans. So just under half of all of our districts have that on the books for the differentiated pay around hard to staff strategies, and then also coupled sometimes with teacher leader type roles. So it's a combination that can often be effective at that point. So just wanted to add that as a side note. For item F, we're bringing, as you know, on final reading, 3 revisions to provide greater clarity on the teacher and principal evaluation policy around 3 topics. First is for districts have had the power to propose, create, develop, and implement an alternate pay or alternate evaluation model, and this simply lays out the steps, the process, which has never been clear before. So districts have a process to engage to do that. Second is just clarifying language around tested teachers that have student growth that would call the Trump rule of a 3, 4, or 5 for their achievement measure. They've always had that. It's just clarifying that happens automatically when that occurs. And then third is, again, the process for student surveys. So districts that are interested and want to use student surveys as a support tool and also as percent of the evaluation model, it lays out the process for that as on the piece. So those are the clarifying pieces, and happy to take any questions for final.
Okay, questions? Any questions? Okay, just one comment. I'm glad to see that the student evaluation is in there as an option. You know, I would like to see us progress to the day where we are going to have a requirement that has student input into the evaluation. I think to me, that makes a lot of sense, but
Yeah.
realize where we are at the present time, so.
And a good point. We have a number of districts that are using it currently as a support tool and for providing feedback to teachers, but not yet in part of the formal evaluation process. But we anticipate, to your point, that will gain momentum. So.
Good. And I hope we'll
sort
share
of-
the good results that we get from that widely so that we can be more prominent part of our evaluation process. Mike?
So to follow along what you're saying, what would need to happen, and as we gather information, to actually put student evaluations into the teacher evaluation policy?
I think it's an excellent question, given we have almost 30 districts on that combo, either a few districts that have formally used it and they have that flexibility option but not requirement, and then we have about 25 districts, as I mentioned to the chairman and to the board, that are using it as a feedback tool, and they're very interested in almost piloting this year to see what those results will bring. So I think short term we'll have a very clear sense in April, and maybe that's another update, Sarah, that we could think about for what are the what's the impact this year of a significant number of districts, to decide if that's something that, to make that is, if I understand the question, to make it mandatory piece.
So would that require a change in law?
Yeah, so let me jump in,
Yeah.
and I think what you're asking, Mike, if I'm hearing you right, is what would it take to be able to use it as part of the evaluation?
Right.
Currently, under the law, it can be used in the qualitative 50%. So we've got, I think it's just Shelby County with an approved model using it as, but now I'm going to forget what percentage. It's between 5 and 10, 5%. So that allows then other districts to use it at 5% because the board has approved a model that uses it for 5% in the qualitative portion. The law currently would not allow it to be part of the student achievement or student growth piece.
Yeah, I could see that,
Yeah.
but
So it's allowed now under our policy by the approved model in Shelby
Right,
County at
on the
5%.
qualitative 50 is part of the 50, right?
But that's the only way currently that it could be used. So it couldn't be used for the 15% or any other.
so what would it look like if we wanted all districts to utilize some part of that 50% qualitative observation, whatever, to be student feedback?
It would take a change in at least the policy on the qualitative side, and probably a long conversation about cost, just to make sure that it was able to be implemented, because there is a cost to it. But we could do it in policy in the qualitative portion.
Right. So I think those are the two big issues
Right.
that would be there that
I think,
are
I mean, there'd be a
promising,
number of
but certainly to recognize. I think right now they're right around $1 a survey per student, the cost.
And it varies. There's more vendors now offering student
Right, there's 3
surveys,
vendors,
like
and-
since the inception, but
Right. So I think those are the two issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve on final reading?
So move.
Got a motion, second?
Second.
Got a second. Any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. Sarah, State Board Master Plan.
going to move to the podium so I can see you. Good morning. We had a lengthy discussion, as I know all of you know, yesterday about the board's master plan, and it's before you today on final reading. I want to note, though, that this has been a conversation that began last spring, and it's been, I think, a really fruitful one for the board. We've been thinking very carefully about vision and strategic priority areas within a very broad charge in the law around K-12 policy. So what you have before you is the final reading on the master plan. We will note that the updates to the version that's in your notebooks will be updated further based on the conversation yesterday. So there's a few additional changes that we'll be making to reflect the comments and desires of the board as discussed yesterday at the workshop. But I want to note, too, that this master plan is slightly different in format from past master plans in that it's both a long-range vision for what we want to be tracking towards around student achievement goals. We have 3 student achievement goals that we'll be looking at annually as we get closer to 2020 with an eye towards those goals 5 years out. And then it's also a blueprint for our work as a board for 2016. So that policy piece under the strategic priority areas that the board has identified really lays the blueprint for the work that we will be doing together over the next year and the things that we hope to accomplish and hold ourselves accountable for. So that piece will be revisited annually in terms of the policy priority areas that the board sets each year in addition to those longer range student achievement targets. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions or hear any additional comments.
Okay. Wendy?
So, Sarah, I was tasked, I think, yesterday with coming up with language around the issue that I raised on the ACT. So I don't know if you want me to.
If you've got it ready, that'd be great.
Say what I
present now.
Okay. So on page 5, I guess, goal 2, my proposed edit would be the sentence that says by 2020 we will raise the average to 21. I would change to by 2020 we will raise the average of the scores of all students required by law to take either the ACT or SAT to 21. And that's the best my lawyer brain could condense it. So,
do you want to say that one more time for the record? I want to make sure
Sure.
we get that in the notes. So
we'll
we can...
raise the average of the scores of all students required by law to take either the ACT or SAT, and then back to 21, which was there.
Okay. I think we've got that now for the minutes. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Mike?
So when we first started talking about our master plan, we had a lot of conversation about it needing to be stretch goals. It needed to be stretch but doable, and it needed to be measurable. In other words, there's a gazillion master plans that have been put together that are sitting on obscure shelves never looked at. I think you guys have done exactly what we envisioned, and including the incremental measuring of this plan. So at any time or incrementally, we're going to be able to see how we're doing. This is a real. It's as much a master plan. It's as much an implementation plan with a lot of action items. It's great. I hope everybody gets a chance to browse through it that would be interested. But you're commended.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Yes, Cato?
I want to commend you and the staff on the community engagement piece. I think that is something we should not take for granted. It is most important that we engage the community, that we're out there in the community, that we're talking to the community. We have an obligation not to each other on this body. We have an obligation to the community.
We certainly agree. And I also want to note, to Mike's point earlier, that once we make the final set of changes based on the conversation yesterday, our hope is to send it off to the printers and have nice copies made that we can distribute. Because I do see this as a working, living document that will lead us this next year and over the next 5 years. So we'll make sure that that gets out to all the right people.
And I think that's terribly important, that it's really a working document. It's not something we're going to put on the shelf, but we're going to take a look at it basically every meeting and see how we're doing progress and whether we need to make changes. Okay, any other comments, questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve on final reading? Got a motion, second? Got a second, okay. Any questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. This is, again, kind of a red letter day here. I think getting this approved and the standards and a number of the other things we have on this agenda is a terribly important meeting for us.
Great.
So thank you, Sarah and staff. Okay, special course for permanent status. Tammy?
Thank you. Just make sure it was on. Making sure the speaker was on. You have before you today a list of special courses that are up for permanent status. LEAs can request approval to offer a course that is not on the list of permanent courses that are approved by the state board. These special courses are created by the local district and they're reviewed and approved by the Department of Education. After 3 years, the LEA can request for the courses to be a permanent part of that local district. So before you have a list today of courses that are in their 3rd year, and there's a request from the LEAs to make these courses permanent within their districts. Any questions?
Any questions for Tammy? Okay, this is kind of standard process. We, I guess, come back about once a year and go through this regimen. The thing that I get concerned about, if you look through those courses, you know, it's a lot in there that I just wonder whether it really need to be part of a high school experience. And got through reading a book here by the Council of Trustees and Alumni called The Cost of Chaos in the Curriculum, and it really deals with higher education. But I see some elements of the diversity in the courses that we've got listed here. Is just wondered whether we really need to have all those options out there in the high school curriculum. But you know, this is kind of standard practice and something we need to do and accomplish and move forward with. So, is there a motion to approve? Got a motion? Got a second? Any? Mike?
I agree with you. One of the things that we are challenged with is the number of course time we have in any day. So we have jettisoned things like phys ed for health because we don't have time in the day to do it. So we've just taken it out, and we've done that for a number of things. The other thing I see, but when we're talking about ACT prep courses, I mean, the ACT prep courses exist for any entrance level, but when it's taking up a time in a regular school day, as opposed to after hours, that I'm kind of getting a little bit wondering what the core role is and stuff. But dang, if we've got time for a whole lot of extra classes, we really ought to go back and look at what we have said in the past we don't have time to do anymore.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Is there a motion to approve? What, you moved? Okay. Got a second? Got a second. Okay. Any other question, comments? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Tammy, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Paul, Instructional Leader Preparation Program approvals.
Well, good morning again, and we appreciate yesterday the dialogue on this item around Leader Prep Program approval. As you remember, we have 3 programs, 2 that we're recommending for full approval based on the review cycle in this last calendar year, University of Tennessee Chattanooga and Bethel. And then we have 1 that's approval with stipulations, which is Middle Tennessee State University, which will trigger another pretty rigorous review site and evidence collection period in the next 6 months. And then we would bring back in the fall for a recommendation to the board based on the triggering of that process now that they had partially met and have these stipulations. Also want to add, we will be, as the commissioner mentioned yesterday, looking to strengthen and clarify the leader policy going into the summer and fall around specifically issues like this that would provide greater clarity to the existing policy from, I believe, again, the 2008 leadership policy. So at that. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, questions for Paul? Any questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve? Got a motion? Second? Got a second? Allison? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Okay, we'll move to the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation. And if you remember at our last meeting, we had some questions about why we needed to do this every time. It seemed like a pretty perfunctory task that we were charged with. I'm told that if I read this statement, into the minutes here that we'll only have to do it one time this year. I'm not sure this is going to save time because it could take longer to read this than we frequently spend on this item, but let me read this the intent here is that if we approve it today, then we won't have to address it again until this time next year. TCA 49-4-201 gives TSAC, the Student Assistance Corporation, the authority to promulgate rules relative to the suspension of license for default on student loan obligations guaranteed or administered by TSAC. TCA 49-5-108D2 requires the state board to suspend, deny, or revoke the license of a teacher who is in default if such teacher is not entered into a payment plan or has failed to comply with a payment plan approved by TSAC. TSAC has an extensive review process, and we heard about that yesterday, an opportunity for the debtor to request a hearing regarding determinations of default in place. TSAC Rule 1640-01-23. State Board of Education Rule 520-02-03-.09 requires the State Board to vote to suspend teacher license for a number of reasons, including default on student loans. State Board of Education rules also allow for the opportunity for a hearing prior to suspension. Suspension orders are lifted upon receipt of confirmation from TSAC of compliance with a repayment plan. Given the extensive opportunity for not only administrative remedies, but also the ability to lift a suspension through compliance with TSAC obligations, I'm advised by counsel that the State Board of Education may vote once to suspend all license determined to be in default during a calendar year upon notification of default by TSAC. Such a vote does not abridge the license holder opportunity for a hearing pursuant to State Board of Education Rule 520-02-03-.09. A listing of the suspensions enacted under this vote should be supplied to the board at its quarterly meetings. Therefore, as chairman, I move that upon notification from TSAC that a license holder is in default, such license should be suspended according to State Board of Education rules and accordingly to the obligations of law during the time of such default, and that this motion cover all such instances during calendar year 2016, and that a list of suspensions covered by this action will be published quarterly in the minutes of this board. Do I have a second? Thank you. Okay, any questions? Phil, any?
I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about.
And we do have a listing in the material of those that are in default at this point and whose license will be suspended. Wendy.
I just want to make a comment. I was one of the people who asked to know more about the process, and I was stunned yesterday to learn the several years of time, or at least over 1 year, 400-something days, that go into the process before they reach us. So I'm a big fan of due process. That is like super due process. And so I am very comfortable now, having been concerned with this process and with the motion. So I will definitely be voting in favor of the motion.
Any questions, comments? Okay, this requires a roll call. So Phyllis, you could call the roll, please. Aye. Okay, we'll now move to the teacher license actions. We want to treat on an individual basis items B, D, and J. We will take the others other than B, D, and J as one entity. Is there a motion that we approve the recommendations of staff on teacher license other than B, D, and J? Got a motion? Got a second? Got a second. Okay, this requires a roll call vote, so
Mr.
Phyllis?
Chairman.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had a question regarding item E.
Yes, ma'am. And your question was regarding the difference between it being a misdemeanor conviction and our recommendation based on that. As I looked through our files, there were a few instances of suspensions for theft of under $500, but to highlight a difference between this particular action and those all involved PTA or school funds.
Okay, but this person was arrested and charged and pled guilty and served several days in jail.
Correct.
And so it just was really hard for me to think that that's just a suspension.
Well, and she was suspended for 3 days from the local education agency. And another difference between this and, say, the felony felony theft conviction that's also in this current batch. With one, a judge put the other person on diversion, and a judge did not choose to do so here, but that is up to judicial interpretation and judicial discretion. Part of our basis on this action was just the mere fact that a misdemeanor and felony are considered very different under criminal law, and so we were treating them differently here as well.
Mr. Chairman, I think I would need to vote against this if it was grouped with the others. So do I need to request that also be pulled?
Yes, I think we ought
Then
to.
I make that request.
Okay.
Item E be pulled out.
Okay, let's,
E.
yeah. We'll then have a motion then that we approve all of them pulling out E in addition to the ones that,
So I would amend my motion, I guess, to vote on all but B, D, E, and J.
okay. We have a second. It's got a second, okay. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Jensen.
Aye. The ayes have it. The motion passed. We'll now address individually the items we pulled out. First of all, item B. Questions on item B? Comments? Wendy?
Since I've asked to pull these, if I can, and I'm sure the board is tired of the speech, but I feel like I need to make it every time because these licensure issues are the things that are the most painful part of being on this board is seeing what people who are in classrooms with children, and I have 2 children in public school classrooms, are accused of doing. And so I would just say that, again, until we hold teachers, all teachers, to a level of professionalism that they deserve, they will not be treated as professionals. And that comes with the teacher prep programs, it comes with evaluations, it comes with their pay, and it certainly comes with their conduct. And so I asked to pull B because I have real concerns about a suspension for someone who has indecent nude photographs of himself on a school computer. I've even more concern because he admitted it, acknowledged taking them, but just couldn't quite remember how they ended up on a school laptop. And it was discovered on the school laptop because another employee decided to use the school laptop, and I could envision a student using that school laptop. And so my motion on this, after whatever discussion, will be, I know we can't move for a different punishment here. You have to give notice in favor of due process. My motion is to pull this for you to recommend further or a harsher punishment. And for the record, I will not be voting to ever grant this license again. So whatever punishment you decide, my vote will be for revocation.
Okay, so you want to make a motion that we...
My motion is that we remove this from today's agenda for the staff to look further into a different punishment.
Okay, is there a second? Got a second?
I got a. So, in regard to process, because I missed something, if Wendy or any of us should want to make a substitute motion to revoke, would that be in order?
That would not. To revoke would require me to give the teacher additional notice and give them a chance for an actual hearing.
Got it.
Okay?
May I ask another question? So if you recommend revocation, you give notice, they can ask for a hearing at that point.
Correct.
If they don't ask for a hearing and we vote to revoke, they then can have a hearing at that point as well?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so their point of entry for a hearing is prior to our vote?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions, comments? What, do we need a roll call vote to remove, you think? Okay, we will not have a roll call vote then to remove. Motion is to remove item B. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, item E.
Do you want to do D?
I'm sorry, D.
This was me again. And I know everyone has reviewed these, but this is actually, I would treat this the same regardless, but it's actually my zoned high school, so I looked at it with even a more careful eye. This is a teacher who physically brought down a student, was apparently allowed to remain, and then physically was removed from the student, apparently by other teachers, was then on another occasion physically, what I would call, assaulted the student a second time. Then when he was told to leave the school, came back to the school, went up to the student, told him he was still there, has shown, according to the folks in Williamson County, a cavalier attitude. I believe the letter from them to him was, high schools are not boot camps, students are not military recruits. I, again, think this is a person who has a right to, make a living, has a right to whatever he wants to do, but has, in my opinion, these actions forfeit his right to be a teacher in a school. And so my motion is to remove this from the agenda today to, for the board staff to present us with a harsher punishment.
Okay, is there a second? Got a second. Discussion? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of removing item D, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, item E. Carolyn?
That it's really hard for me to vote for this being a formal reprimand, considering the circumstances that we had in our folder. I felt like it should be at least a suspension, if not revocation. So
certainly.
Okay. So Carolyn makes that motion that we remove. Is there a second? Wendy, second. Okay. Any question, discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The only thing I really noticed different here is her attitude as opposed to the one we just voted on. And as we're looking at this, I think that ought to be taken under consideration also.
Okay. I think it's a good comment.
Mr. Chairman, I think that may bring up an issue. I think we don't always have a lot of information on these situations, and I feel like we are having to make decisions based on sometimes just a one-sheet information sheet, whereas some have a lot of information, and we have other additional information from things that have been in the media about the case. So I think sometimes we are in a bad situation, an uncomfortable situation for us, because we want to protect our students always.
And if I may address that real quickly, I think sometimes that stems from a lack of information that we are able to gather on the forefront. And I'm happy to have discussions with you later about exactly what information you would like to see in each case, and that would give me a good understanding and idea of what else we would want to gather in our investigations and what we can bring to you every time.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second that we remove item E. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Item J.
that was me again. And again, this is my county, not my zone school, but I would say that a suspension in a situation where a teacher was doing videos with students in sexually explicit outfits, weapons are in his classroom, along with from the information we were given from the district, sexual acts with himself on school grounds, materials that support that happened. This one, I don't have a question that I will never vote to grant this person a license again. I will say it breaks my heart when I read the students' emails about how great of a teacher he is, because we have a shortage of, we have a lot of great teachers, but we also have a shortage of great teachers, and that breaks my heart. But the lesson that I want my kids to learn, and the lesson I want our kids in this state to learn, is that actions have consequences. And in my opinion, these actions should have a much harsher consequence. So I would move to remove this for a harsher punishment.
I am happy to answer any questions about the process that we took on coming to this recommendation. As far as granular questions about the facts, Mr. Harrington here is Mr. Wade's attorney, and they are here to answer any questions you may have about the specifics.
Okay, so and I appreciate you being here. I will say, as a lawyer, what this triggers to me is that there is a dispute as to facts, and what that triggers to me is this is something a judge should decide. And so maybe maybe that's just where it needs to be pulled, and that needs to happen, because Mike Looney's not here, and the principal's not here, and these parents aren't here, and so to have half of the facts brought to the board, while I appreciate your interest in doing it, to me just isn't. We've never done that. Have we ever heard evidence?
Not to my knowledge, but our rules and policies allow people to petition to address questions.
Right, and I'm fine with that. I just mean when as a lawyer, no offense, when you get lawyers involved, it usually means there is a dispute that needs to be resolved in a tribunal where both sides are heard. So I would move to remove this, and then if there's a hearing, there's a hearing.
Okay, we've got a motion to remove in a second. Are there questions? Questions for the gentlemen that are here? Any questions for
Mr.
him?
Chairman, I was wondering, would he have an opportunity to at least make a short statement as well?
Okay, a short statement, but I certainly agree with Wendy that, we need to have all parties here if we're going to really get into debate of this.
Right. Chairman, members of the board, Curtis Harrington here for Peter Wade today. And members of the board, it has been our interest and our priority from day one beginning with Mr. Wade's interview at Page High School, all the way through me becoming involved, my short communications with the Williamson County Sheriff's Office, where during my first phone call, they told me they see no violations, they see no issue, they're closing the file, through me reaching out to staff prior to the staff even receiving the file. Our message has been consistent, and it is this. We want daylight on all of these allegations, all of these facts, because we firmly believe that the facts are on our side. Now, the media sure made a juicy story, and that story's been carried through in ways that have bridged the gap and drawn conclusions between pillars of facts. And so we're here, and we've had multiple communications. Mr. Wade requested an in-person meeting with the staff, which was conducted. And I think the staff would tell you from day one, we have shared everything that we have, and we have been an open book, a complete open book, to explain all of these allegations and facts. And we have explanations and proof for all of them, most if not all of which that we have access to that have been submitted to the board through my letter of December the 11th, 2015. I understand Board Member Tucker's point that this may be a factual dispute, and I can see how it could be couched as a factual dispute, but after our communications with the staff and the proof that we've submitted, we think this could be a summary judgment issue. We don't think there are any genuine issues of material fact. And we believe in the suspension that we accepted that was proposed by the board, that is a fair suspension because of the fact that if there's anything Mr. Wade did wrong, what he did was not following proper channels for the filming of the math videos. There were third parties there assisting in the filming, so on and so forth. There were props used, props that are specifically allowed by Tennessee state law, by statutory law, and that were used simply as props in these videos with knowledge in a project that had full knowledge of school administration, past and present teachers and students, and teachers' parents. And the third thing, to raise funding for these videos, to see them through, he launched a Kickstarter campaign that all involved knew about without receiving the proper formality approvals for attaching those funds to a school project. In light of that, and in light of Mr. Wade getting back to doing what he does better than nearly anyone in the state of Tennessee and what he's done for 20 years, which is teaching an advanced technical course, in the fall, we accepted the staff's proposal of suspension through May 23rd, 2016. And so unless the board has any questions.
Any questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to say, Mr. Harrington, I appreciate what you're saying. I, as a lawyer, would have loved an opportunity to go in front of the, a board and argue that all the facts are here. But the reality is, as you know, the system requires for a fact finding for both sides to be heard. And so I appreciate that. Summary judgment motion, maybe your administrative law judge will grant it. If that is what happens, if a judge decides that this is baseless and that you should be, then you are welcome to come back. But my point is a judge will have to do that because the facts we were given by the district, there is no way I would give someone a license back under those facts. So if facts are different, I think,
Sure. Sure.
Have a great hearing.
Okay.
Thank you.
We, any questions? We do have a motion from Wendy that we remove. Is there a second? Got a second. Okay. Any questions? Okay. All in favor of removal, say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. To remind you of our meeting dates for the remainder of 2016, April 15th, July the 22nd, October the 21st. Also remind you of the reading event that we've got planned for February the 17th, and hope that can participate in that. Thank you for being here. The meeting is adjourned.